Welcome back. Keeping the lights on all continues to be a challenge for Eskom. The power utility has announced that stage 2 load shedding will continue until Thursday. Energy expert Ted Blom says there have been consequences for this, and there will have to be consequences for this. Blom is suggesting that people affected should be compensated and that the CEO of Eskom should also be financially penalized. So for more on this, I'm joined now by Ted Blom to just expound further on this. Ted, I'm sure many of us are absolutely frustrated at the fact that load shedding has returned once again. We thought that we'd seen the last of load shedding when we saw an entry into the warmer seasons. But it looks as though the same excuses are being used, coal reserves, and now with the wet weather, it will be, the cold is wet. But at this point in time, should South Africans buy these excuses from Eskom?
No, I think, frankly, that we've had enough of excuses. We've had a new management team, which was promised and forced it on us by the president. And I've had an excellent suggestion from my followers, and that is that for every day of load shedding, the president and his election promises, the deputy president, who's directly responsible for Eskom, the minister and the executive of Eskom, dock a day's pay for a month's pay for every day that we have load shedding. And then they'll start feeling the pain that you and I as consumers feel when we lose our jobs, or we can't earn money, or we can't do business in our businesses and so forth. This nonsense of load shedding is an ANC foisted thing, and it wasn't there before 2001 when Eskom was professionally run. It's only since they've taken over the control of Eskom that we've had this deteriorating situation, and it's getting worse. I had a look at some of the coal stats this week, and it seems to me that the maintenance on the coal stations are not being done anymore, and it might be directly attributable to the fact that this government now wants to go solar and wind, and we all know that that's not sustainable, especially when there's clouds overhead. So we need a complete revamp of the whole energy supply chain, because at this rate, we're going to lose more jobs and more people are going to be unemployed. And it's just a disaster in waiting.
Ted, then is there a deliberate, an actual deliberate initiative to ensure that these coal reserves are not maintained, they're not replenished at all? Is there a deliberate attempt to cripple Eskom by its executives, by state interests, by those that are in political influence? Is this all done deliberately so for a particular agenda?
Well, let's use a term coined by one of the ministers of joining the dots. I went on record and said that Eskom needs about 600 billion to do the catch-up and refurbishment of their coal fleet. Their current CEO, who is a novice to the sector but by now should have found his feet, has come back and says that he needs about 300 billion, and he's not going to spend that money. He's rather going to spend it on renewables. So yes, you are right. This is a deliberate attempt by the management and the government to cripple the coal power stations, which we know South Africa's economy relies on. So it's deliberate. Join the dots.
Andre de Ruyter was supposed to be the guy that allows for new brooms to sweep clean. He was supposed to be what we represent as the new dawn, so as to say, at the power utility. Do you think he's lived up to these expectations, or do you think that, like all the others, he's just failing at being able to maintain and actually solve some of Eskom's woes?
Well, he promised you and me when he took over 18 months ago, in fact, more than 18 months ago, he said that in 18 months he'll fix up Eskom and it will be operating properly. Those 18 months have gone. We've had the worst load shedding in the history of Eskom's 100-year history or 98-year history, and there's no signs that it's getting any better. In fact, you've got to look at the EAF, the energy availability factor. That graph has headed down since 2001, and in fact, the slope has increased in the last year or so. It's actually getting worse, and it's getting worse faster. And then we need to have urgent intervention. Otherwise, we might as well kiss our businesses and our smelters and our mining industries goodbye.
Ted, at this point, what can the citizens of South Africa actually do? Do we call for, Andre de Ruyter's head and say he must resign so that we can get somebody better with a different agenda? Do we call for less government or less political interference at Eskom? It almost sounds as though it's a defeating exercise and a defeating narrative on behalf of the consumers who have to continuously pay for power that is not being supplied.
Yeah, I think we've reached a stage, in all honesty, that the Eskom is now getting to a stage where it's beyond repair. The management of Eskom is totally incompetent, and their record shows it. It's not politicizing the matter. The records show it. And I think the days of us relying on Eskom as the supplier of last resort are fast disappearing or have disappeared, and it's now up to a question of survival. And those people that are going to survive are those who take the control of their power situation in their own hands and get off the grid and do what's the right thing to do. There is now a relaxation in the 100 megawatts window that's been opened up for private people to do their own power. And I would urge any responsible businessman to get his act together. And if they need input, I'm more than willing to help and advise on a pro bono basis. But we need to stand together and solve our energy problems, because this government is clearly incapable. Other than stealing and breaking things down, they're not capable of running a proper electricity system. It's proven.
And of course, we would have the Public Enterprises Minister, Faith Mangope, also lament about how he's also trying to fix the Eskom's problems. Is he also another broom that is clearly not being able to sweep clean?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you will recall the days when every time Eskom announced another disaster, the minister was actually the announcer. And he sort of surreptitiously made himself invisible and disappeared off the scene. Because it seems to me he's now also reached the end of his tether in trying to fix up Eskom. And I guess he's thrown in the towel. And the only person that hasn't thrown in the towel is still singing the praises of the incompetent situation at Eskom is the president, and as part of his election promises. So let him put his promises on the table and have a situation that for every day's load shedding, everybody involved with the load shedding and the failing of Eskom docks a month's salary and feels the pain that you and I feel on a daily basis.
How do the citizens make this happen, Ted? I mean, how do we call for something like this? I mean, it sounds like something that I can imagine there'll be lots of pushback from, but how do the citizens actually say, if you don't want to restore our power, then you should actually not have a month's salary, especially if you're not going to do the job that we're paying you to do as the taxpayers?
Well, the new CEO director, one of the first pledges he made was that he was going to implement consequence management. But it seems to me that it doesn't apply to him. If he wants to lead by example, then he should put his money on the table and do what practice what he preaches. It's as simple as that. And if we don't get it, then I think people need to vote with their feet and vote in the elections and make sure that their voices are heard. Because this ANC is clearly incompetent and not listening to the people. We have been crying about load shedding since 2008. And it's just gotten worse and worse. And president after president, I mean, think of Zuma promising that there will be no more load shedding in his lifetime. And Mr. Ramaphosa, who was directly involved with Eskom on numerous occasions, including the war room, and as a supplier of coal to Eskom, I mean, he made pledges that he's now sorted out the problem. And now he says, well, there's still a light down the tunnel. There's no light down the tunnel. We've reached the end of our tether.
Ted Blom, we'll leave it there for this evening. Thank you so much for your insights. And, of course, that a suggestion saying that for every time that we do not have power, it looks as though the executive of Eskom, including the CEO, should have a month's salary docked.